Welcome to Board Game Geek. We are covering Gen Con Online with more than 30 hours of game demonstrations with interviews with designers and publishers. We've got a lot of different games to show you. We are joined right now by Beth Erickson from Z-Man Games, and we're going to take a quick look, relatively quick look, at Pandemic Legacy Season 0. I say quick look because, of course, like the other Pandemic Legacy games, you have a campaign in this box that can take many hours to play. We are not going to spoil anything from this, but Beth, maybe give an overview of what the world is like for Pandemic Legacy Season 0, where its places in the Legacy trilogy, and then we can carry on from there.
Yeah. So this is the third and final installment of the Pandemic Legacy trilogy, but instead of it being a Season 3, it is Season 0. So it is actually a prequel, and it is set in the 1960s. Now, this is a game that you can play even if you've played 1, even if you've played 2, even if you've played neither of those. You can play it in any order. Matt and Rob did a really great job of putting in a really interesting narrative story and putting in things that if you know the like Easter eggs and the story beats, they'll be like aha moments. But if you don't, then those things lead really well into the next games as well.
Okay. So effectively, they could be played in any order that you wish.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Okay.
yes, it is totally up to the player. So in this one, the players are medical specialists that have been recruited by the CIA. It's a very spy thriller, kind of noir vibe. And in it, you need to do some research. You need to figure out what the Soviet threat is, find some agents. There's a lot of like covert ops stuff. One of the things that I love the most is the cover aliases. So every player will get a few different cover aliases that you make a disguise, you get different abilities, and those things will help you do different tasks as you move around and complete missions.
Right. Nikki has one of the passports there, which will hold one of the player's aliases. Yes, you can have different identities because you effectively have 3 sides in the game, and you're going to take part in all of them.
Yes. So as as this person who has been recruited by the CIA, you have to move into different cities that have different alliances. So you may need to switch from like an allied alias to a Soviet alias or a neutral alias. And those things will let you do different things in the city. So you can kind of sneak in, complete a mission, move to another location. And it's really fun because there's a bunch of stickers that you get to put on the different, into the passport to create your own alias. And honestly, that was one of my favorite parts playing the game.
That's right. In addition to both adding your name, yes, you get to have your look as well. So there's some customization there. Now, before you actually have the campaign itself, you have a prologue game because gameplay is similar to other Pandemic titles, but it has unique elements to this world and this timeline.
It does. So you'll bare minimum when you play this, you will get at least 13 sessions because there's, the 12, one for each month. And then there's the prologue. Now you can play the prologue as many times as you want in order to get used to the mechanics. You're going to get a lot of gameplay out of this. Even if you win every single month, you still get 13 sessions. So the prologue kind of gives you an intro to the setting, some of the actions that you'll do. And it's just a good like intro to get you in without like affecting any of the legacy components yet. Mm-hmm. So in that one, in the prologue, you start with a temporary alias. And you are trying to find Agent Sabic. At the beginning of the rulebook, there's a little information from your CIA handler, Coop. And we do have, we were able to do a really fun video recording that if you would like Coop to read the brief to you, you can just scan that little QR code. And that's available on our website. And he'll give you your instructions so you can get ready for your mission. But Agent Sabic is missing, and Coop wants you to help find him. And you also start a little bit of work searching for some information on what we know is Project Medusa.
Okay. So with this initial prologue game, yes, you have the agent starting in Atlanta, We have some Soviet agents that start on the board. We've got the board partly set up there. We need some more Soviet agents out. Different cities, and the Soviet agents are the threats that you are facing in this game. So instead of disease cubes, you have the red menace, which is a funny name for a disease. At least, you could think of it that way, because the agents they definitely serve the role of the obstacle or the opposition, at least for the Prologue game.
They're not a disease. They are definitely, the obstacle that you were trying to get around. As you move into a city, of course, if there's an enemy agent there, that might make your mission harder. So that's why, there's the neutralize agent action, which, you can think thematically that it's something where when you neutralize an agent, maybe you're blowing their cover, maybe doing some like counter espionage to kind of foil their plans, so you're able to do your plans in that city.
Okay, Nikki's helpfully given us the guide there.
Yeah. There's a lot of different actions. So
yes. So pandemic style, you have 4 actions on a turn, and you can take whatever assortment of those actions you wish.
Yep.
So
so you're still able to move around the board. You can walk to a location, you can ferry to a location, you can still fly places. Now, flying can be a little more difficult depending on what type of affiliation the city has. And that's where sometimes the cover aliases come into play, or the affiliation that's on a city card that you discard. So there's a couple different elements that get a little trickier depending on what the affiliation of the city is, and that is different than regular pandemic.
Okay. I don't know if you actually go through a little more detail with the flights, because it is a definite change just in how you evaluate your hand and what's useful to you at different times.
Yeah, I don't have the cards in front of me right now, so let me see what I remember. I believe that the most difficult thing is usually the flying into the Soviet cities, because usually they have more surveillance, and I believe, if I remember right, that was called an undocumented flight.
Yeah, so the undocumented flight actually was if you have a card for a city and you are in that city, you can fly anywhere off the books. That's the undocumented flight. You have to discard that card. No one knows. You just slipped out. Someone helped you
just slipped
escape.
Under the radar, went somewhere else.
But what was really interesting is if you are flying from a allied city and you have the allied card, then you just reveal it. You don't have to actually discard it. And that's a big difference, because you can reveal London and then fly to London, and you still have the London card there. So you can use that to set up a safe house in London, or use it as you're trying to investigate where something is hiding in Europe. So it's very different.
That's really beneficial, because then, you can keep that card either to help you assemble a team later. You can use it for a safe house. So sometimes it might be more beneficial to actually fly to an allied city and then use your next actions to walk into the city you want to get to that's near it, which does change some of the decision making as you're moving around the board.
Right, because flying into a neutral city works the same way, where you have to discard the card, and you cannot fly into a Soviet associated city. Yes, you must walk in.
Yep. So you might be able to get near it and then have to walk in. But you do have to be careful if you stay in some Soviet cities or other cities that have surveillance, because then that can sometimes blow your cover. So you need to kind of economize your actions and decide, is it worth it to stay in the city and blow a little bit of cover? Maybe someone else can get there and build a safe house to help protect you. Maybe you could use your final action just to slide into another city that doesn't have surveillance. So there's a lot of different elements that play into decision making on a turn.
Right. So you mentioned surveillance. So if you look at the game board, we see Moscow already has 3 surveillance markers. Those are the red stars on the location. Leningrad has a couple. Eyeballs. Yeah, Leningrad has a couple, and then other locations do as well. So each turn that you end your actions in a city with that surveillance and not in a safe house, bad things happen.
So I believe it's when you start your turn in a city with surveillance is when you
Oh,
would scratch off the cover.
that's true. Because yes, someone could escort you out, depending on the player powers that you have available or the cards that you use. That's true. Yes. So
Yeah, so
yes, if you
someone
started
could
a
come
turn
and
there.
build the safe house to protect you, or someone could potentially move your pawn out of that city. But yeah, if there's surveillance, you're being watched, and then your cover can get blown, and that's when you'll scratch off in the passport. There's little scratch off circles at the bottom of each alias, and depending on what you reveal, different things can happen. You might discard a card, you might get a liability, or you might burn the identity entirely. And if you burn that identity, that means you can't use that cover alias for the rest of the game.
Yes,
So there's a little bit of
and
risk involved.
yeah, it's a great concept of replicating that '60s spy world, where yes,
Yep.
locations are dangerous, and you have to plan ahead a bit more. What can you risk as you go through here? Now that
Mm-hmm.
again, this is all related to the prologue game. We haven't even got into the actual
Yeah.
campaign. The box includes stickers, and it's got like I don't know, 80 surveillance stickers. It has a lot more. Yes, you know that
Depending on
bad
how
things
the
are
game
coming.
goes, certain cities will definitely get more surveillance, and then it gets even
Right.
more risky. So you can add stickers to the board. You can sometimes do counter surveillance. That is also an option. So each month you'll have a certain amount of funding from the CIA, and depending on how you do in the campaign, you can spend some funds get to get assets that may be out in the field or items that you're able to use. You can also then do the counterintelligence to get rid of some of the intelligence on the board. There's a lot of different things that you can do, but again, you have to like measure the risk, decide how much you want to spend. Like you do have some limits, but you do have ways to kind of counter the risky things that happen.
Okay. You mentioned teams. So how
Yes,
do teams function? That is a new element to
it
this
is.
season.
Yeah. So teams, kind of in the same way that in base game Pandemic, you would need to trade in a set of cards to find the cure. Mechanically, this is similar in that you will trade in cards to form a team. Now, it's different mechanically because the teams are represented by these little plastic vans. They're super cute. And each one has a different affiliation. There's the neutral, the Soviet, and the Allied. And teams are then something that once they're on the board, they will help you complete objectives. And they're also something that can help you neutralize agents. So one of the actions you can do once a team is on the board is you can choose to actually move that team around the board. And if it is in a city that matches the alliance of the like that's printed on the van, so if it's like a neutral one and it's in a neutral city, if there are any agents left in that at the end of the turn, then it will mop up those agents and remove them from the board. So it kind of lets you do some extra actions to neutralize agents, even if your pawn isn't in the city.
Right.
And
Because
you
one
will
of the
definitely
game
need teams to do objectives. So they are a very
yes.
important piece of the gameplay.
Yes. Yes, because one of the game losing conditions is that you run out of agents to put on the board. So
Yep.
you can't let that happen. You need those teams. So yes, when the prologue game, as you mentioned, you were trying to find an agent who is in hiding, specifically in Novosibirsk. Novosibirsk.
Yes.
So you need to get a Soviet team to that location in order to find him. And now the other objective for the prologue was a really interesting twist on pandemic play. I don't know if you can talk about that.
Remind me what the other one is. It's been a little bit since I played.
About finding there is a location in Europe that you need to go
Oh, yes.
to, but you don't know which one.
Yes. So a very interesting aspect of the game is unknown target cities. My cat's saying hello. Um, so unknown target cities are a new thing in season 0. And in it, you might have an objective that says, hey, we've got some intelligence that something is going on in Europe, but we don't know which city. So in the prologue, what you do when you're starting setup is you take all of the Europe cards from the player deck, you shuffle them up, you take out one, and put that face down under the objective. Now, as you get player cards in your hand that have Europe on them, you'll understand like, oh, okay, like I have London in my hand. So then that means that the objective is not going to happen in London. And so it starts to do this kind of process of elimination, deduction of which city is left that we think is actually where the objective is taking place. So sometimes you may end up like running out of time. You may need to just kind of take a guess and hope you're right. And the best way to do that is, if you have like 2 or 3 cities left, maybe you have enough teams that you can put teams in those cities that you think might be the unknown target city. And then if you try to complete the objective, you can see if you are right.
Right, because you must have a team in that city at the time you choose to activate, or at the time you choose to guess. And Europe has both Soviet and Allied and one neutral city. So
it does.
You have to cover all the bases in there.
It's an interesting challenge if you haven't pulled all the Europe cards yet.
Yes. And of course that varies a lot just depending on how things come out in the game. And it's fascinating to see how the pandemic system gets used different ways, or it's just this other element that all these other things get added onto or twisted in a different way, because you still have the fundamental pandemic mechanism of cities getting something in it, and that's bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, the core elements of Pandemic are still there. You're still it's still a cooperative game. You still have character abilities. Things are still popping up in the cities that you need to resolve. You still need to gather cards in order to do different objectives. Like a lot of the core elements are still there. But Matt and Rob did such a great job, like weaving in the theme and giving you so many different options and so many different new challenges that. There's just a lot in this game.
There is. And this is only the prologue. Again, we have not talked about anything.
There's so many more things hidden in those boxes.
Right. We've got 8 boxes in the box. Mm-hmm. You have a bunch of rule stickers hidden behind different pull-out portions of the game. The legacy deck itself that you open only at the right time, an operations deck that is also sealed that is not described at all, I believe, if I remember from the rules.
Nope.
Yeah. So
there's a lot of different elements, and there's also the full debrief book. So that's kind of a new thing as well, is, as you complete or fail objectives, it will tell you to read different entries in the debrief book. So no matter what, you will get a piece of story, but what happens could be very different depending on whether or not you failed or succeeded.
Right. So yes, then it has so it's a paragraph book element, sort of like Tales of the Arabian Nights, where it's got something in here and you don't actually know what's going to happen. And interestingly, this time as well, you don't have to necessarily complete all of the objectives to advance to the next month. No, you can actually fail one and then still move forward.
Yeah, so this is a little different as well. It's not just a complete fail or a complete success. You can actually get an adequate rating. So maybe there's pretty much always 2 objectives. Sometimes there are 3. And so depending on how your gameplay goes, like you may not have time to complete all 3 objectives, but maybe you got 2 of them done. So you might get an adequate rating and be able to move on, but maybe that affects your funding, or, the CAA kind of admonishes you and says to do better next time in the field. Maybe they actually think you need a little help. It just depends on how the month goes.
Okay. We've got a user in the chat asking about the ETA. When is this game due to be released?
I knew someone would ask. So barring any shipping delays due to COVID, we are expecting it should release in October.
Okay. All right. And is this simultaneous worldwide release in multiple languages? It's kind of been the plan in the past.
We've been working with territory partners, so it should be pretty widely available in October.
Okay. So anything else that we did not mention yet? I thought maybe we might go through a few turns, but it's a little hard to navigate from a distance. I would
a little hard to navigate from a distance. Gosh, that's a lot of it. I will say we are doing, on Saturday, we're doing a discussion about the art and graphic design. In the morning, we'll be doing a live stream with me and a couple members from the art team. I believe that is at 11 a.m. Eastern time. We'll be streaming to our Z-Man Facebook channel. And then in the evening, Matt and Rob will actually be doing a full interview about, Legacy, about designing this game. And they're doing that at 7 p.m. Eastern time. So if people want more info from, obviously, the experts, they did years researching all of this stuff and putting it together, they should definitely tune in for that.
Okay. And you mentioned as well, this is the final title of the trilogy. So it does wrap there. Was that a call from Matt and Rob or Z-Man, or how did that work out that just said, like, yes, we're done. We are closing off this story?
I did not personally have like a call in that, but from my understanding, narratively, they had kind of long pictured this as a trilogy to wrap up the narrative and still kind of leave some stuff open to the imagination, I believe, with some of the, season 2 elements. But it's something that now that there's these 3, it really does complete it as a pretty solid set.
Okay. We had a user mention as well, they've played only so far Hot Zone North America. That was the first title that they've played. We'll be talking about that next in our next segment.
We will.
It's very interesting to see kind of the extremes of the Pandemic series, where that is more streamlined and straightforward, and then you have this game, which is much more involved and really an incredible narrative experience. I still have not played this campaign, but season 1 is still just one of my favorite experiences ever, playing through that. So
yeah, it's great. There's a lot of differences from pandemic game to pandemic game. So there's pretty much a game for anyone for whatever style play they want, whether it is a longer campaign style or something more casual.
Okay. Anything else to mention about the pandemic world or Legacy? Which languages is it actually appearing in?
Oh gosh, I'm not sure. I know we asked one of our internal people what that list of languages would be, but I haven't heard a response yet. I know it's getting localized in a lot. Everyone wants Legacy.
Right.
And once we have more info about that, we'll probably post that on like the Z-Man website or Z-Man social media. I don't have a list off the top of my head.
Okay, understandable. Is there only the one cover? People said in season 1 there was 2 covers. Season 2 they made a panorama. If you put them together, here
there is only one cover for this. And if people would like more information about how that happened and the development of the art for that, we will be discussing that in the art panel Saturday morning.
Okay. All right. Teasers for the future.
Yep. I will say one final thing that I will drop about this in particular is if people do want to try a spoiler-free demo of this, we had originally planned, of course, to have an in-person demo, but we have put up on Tabletop Simulator a version of this that I promise is spoiler-free, so you can try it as much as you want, and it's up for free. I posted the link on BGG, but you should be able to find it if you search Pandemic Legacy Season 0.
Okay. And the Prologue game is really interesting because it is replayable. You're using only the temporary aliases, so those don't change. They have fixed special powers, very similar to other Pandemic Legacy games. And it's extremely helpful. I've played it twice, and the first time I was completely lost. And then the second time it worked out much better because you have to value cards differently and you have to learn how to do that.
Yeah, for people who have played regular Pandemic a lot, it does take a little bit of a shift mentally to readjust how you value the cards and just some of the different strategy elements that you want to do. So I also played the Prologue multiple times before diving into the Legacy part.
Yes, the value of teams especially. Just for doing actions outside of everything else. I had lots of trouble in South America.
Cards, make more teams than you think you need. Just do it.
Yes. South America was just a trouble spot for me continually. And then, if you have a team there, it is almost like having a third hand where everything works out.
Yeah, it's kind of like an extra player because you're able to cover that area with the team, and because as an action you can move them from city to city, you're able to hopefully control some element of the board without having to like fly your pawn all the way across the globe.
Yes, which spends more cards doing that.
It does.
That's right. Use them effectively. Well, Beth, thank you very much for a overview of Pandemic Legacy Season 0, coming ideally October 2020 from Z-Man Games. Greatly appreciate the early look, and you can follow Beth's suggestions for more looks at the game and talk by the designers. So thank you very much.